New details about the 16 Ciders children found hidden in a so-called house of horrors in Ohio. Social workers found bruises, roaches, gnats, and much more many years ago. Major red flags. So what happened? I'll explain. I'm Anjanette Levy, and this is Crime Fix.
The juvenile court record reads,
For nearly 2 months, I've been telling you that children's services workers in Gallia County had contact with Gary Ciders Jr. and Elizabeth Ciders and their children before they ever moved to Vinton County. Well, now we're finally getting to see the records that detail what caseworkers found and why even doctors and school administrators were so concerned. We obtained the records right after Gary Jr. and Elizabeth were indicted by a grand jury in Vinton County on sexual battery and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor charges. The sex charges are not related to the Ciders' immediate family members, but Gary and Elizabeth were also indicted on a mix of felony and misdemeanor counts of child endangering for their 16 children found in that house on Omar Street on June 30th. When they were first arrested, Gary Jr. and Elizabeth had actually faced 16 felony counts of child endangering. Those were all felonies in the second degree. But the concern about Gary and Elizabeth's children actually goes back years to 2020. At that time, they had 9 children and lived in neighboring Gallia County. Children's Services in Gallia County started investigating the Ciders because records show the online school where they were enrolled reported them. At that time, the family was living in this house on Garfield Avenue in Gallipolis. Children's Services considered the children neglected. A juvenile court record reads, this agency initiated an investigation on January 15, 2020, regarding a Ciders child whose name is redacted. The child was 7 years old. It was reported the child was enrolled in Ohio Virtual Academy, OVA, in late fall of 2019, but was entered with no prior schooling, but presented significant developmental delays, an inability to speak and complete sentences or initiate conversation. It was reported that the child has not been to a pediatrician for evaluation of any medical and/or developmental delays. During the initiation of the case, Christina Ciders, the paternal grandmother, stated that the above accusations were true, but then retracted her statement on a later date. So that last part
this
says
agency initiated an investigation on January 15, 2020 regarding a Ciders child whose name is redacted. The child was 7 years old. It was reported the child was enrolled in Ohio Virtual Academy in late fall of 2019, but was entered with no prior schooling, but presented significant developmental delays and inability to speak in complete sentences or initiate conversation. That is not a description of a hidden crime scene. That is the first official page of a file that would grow to document 16 children, 2 counties, and a system that closed the folder twice before the house on Omar Street was ever raided. Imagine a fire inspector walking into a building with smoke pouring from the windows, writing a detailed report about the smoke, recommending a plan to monitor the smoke, and then walking away because the building was still standing. That image is not hyperbole. It is the operational summary of Gallia County Children's Services between January 2020 and June 2021. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Endless Crime, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence.
having contact with the school about the children. It wasn't the parents. Guess who it was? It was Grandma Christina Ciders. She was the one in touch with the school about the children, not Gary Jr. and Elizabeth. All of the children who were enrolled in online school were performing at incredibly low levels academically because they were barely logging on to online school, according to the caseworker. The caseworker wrote, the school has since raised concerns regarding the children age 12, age 11, and age 9 being low academically and performing below grade level expectations. One child is at a 40% attendance level out of 100% and considered off track in the following subjects: math, literature, Mark 12, social studies, history, and science. The oldest child was given an assessment on January 19th, 2020 by her teacher, who found that she is a non-reader. The child knows 14 out of 26 lowercase letters, 21 out of 26 uppercase letters, and 0 out of 26 letter sounds, and the only pre-primer word one knew was and. In addition to struggling with the alphabet, One child can count 1 through 12 before making mistakes. On February 28, 2020, it was reported that the child was given an assessment that found she had not made any academic progress within the last 10 weeks. Neither Gary nor Elizabeth were employed at this time. Gary Jr. listed himself as self-employed, and the records show they qualified for Medicaid and food stamps.
The narrative begins not with Gary Jr. and Elizabeth Ciders, but with the institution that held the legal power to remove their children and chose not to. On January 15, 2020, the Ohio Virtual Academy reported a 7-year-old who had been enrolled with no prior schooling. The child could not speak in complete sentences. The child had never seen a pediatrician for developmental evaluation. The grandmother, Christina Ciders, initially confirmed the accusations to caseworkers, then retracted her statement on a later date. The caseworker wrote that concerns existed for all 9 children in the home.
A shelter care hearing was held later that month, and that's where a court determines whether children should remain with their parents or be placed in a shelter. That means with foster care. After the hearing, the court found, as stipulated to by the parents, there are reasonable grounds to believe that the child is in danger from her surroundings and that protective supervision of the child is necessary to prevent the child's physical and/or emotional harm. The child is in the care and custody of her parents, Gary Ciders II and Elizabeth Ciders. Children's Services began working with the family on January 15, 2020, after receiving a report that a child had been enrolled in Ohio Virtual Academy for school in late fall of 2019 with no prior schooling. She presented with significant developmental delays, inability to speak in complete sentences, or initiate conversation. She had not been seen by a pediatrician for evaluation of any medical and/or developmental delays. There were also concerns that the other school-age children in the family were performing well below grade level expectations after they had allegedly been homeschooled. Likewise, the other children have not been evaluated. The Ciders children were placed on protective supervision status, meaning a caseworker drops by unannounced for visits and ensures that the family follows a case plan. The children were not removed from the Ciders home. They were allowed to stay with their parents. By October 2020, the judge presiding over the case found that reasonable efforts had been made to keep the children from being removed from their parents, and the case, it was closed. The court's order states, the court further finds that it is in the best interest of the child to remain in the custody of her parents, the protective supervision be terminated, and that this case be closed. It is therefore ordered that the child remain in the custody of Elizabeth and Gary Lee Ciders Jr. It is further ordered that protective supervision be terminated. It is further ordered that this case be closed. That's it. Case closed.
One 13-year-old had been enrolled in the virtual academy on January 6, 2020, and by February 4 had not logged into the account once. The academy formally stated the Ciders family was not an appropriate fit for their program and recommended a traditional brick and mortar school. A 12-year-old had a 40% attendance level and was off track in math, literature, social studies, history, and science. The oldest child was assessed by a teacher and found to be a non-reader. She knew 14 out of 26 lowercase letters and 0 out of 26 letter sounds. The only pre-primer word she recognized was and. One child could count from 1 to 12 before making mistakes. 10 weeks later, an assessment found no academic progress had been made in that entire period. Neither parent was employed. Hygiene was poor. The family always wore the same clothes. The caseworker wrote that Gary and Elizabeth were non-compliant with school recommendations, medical examinations, psychological examinations, speech therapy, vision and hearing screenings, and intervention programs. The caseworker concluded the parents were either unwilling or incapable of assuring the children's well-being. In February 2020, a shelter care hearing was held. The court found reasonable grounds to believe the child was in danger from her surroundings. The court ordered protective supervision. The children were not removed. They were allowed to stay with their parents. Case closed.
In December of that same year, just 2 months later, the Ciders and their 9 children had moved into the house on Honeysuckle in Cheshire. We've shown it to you before. And Children's Services opened a new case, this time over concerns that 4 of the children had high levels of lead in their systems. Caseworker Aaron Cantor wrote, there were concerns that parents, Elizabeth and Gary, were not completing medical follow-ups. The medical staff had reported that high levels of lead can lead to developmental delays. During the initiation on December 8th, 2020, caseworker Cantor was denied access to the home and asked to come back because the children were sleeping. There were a number of red flags in caseworker Erin Cantor's affidavit. She was denied access to the children at times, and the conditions in the home were disgusting. Cantor wrote, at the beginning of this agency's investigation, caseworker Cantor was allowed access into the home on December 9th, 2020, but access to the children was denied. While in the home, concerns were raised due to a high population of roaches, flies, and gnats. After further investigation, the family has now become compliant with medical appointments, but medical staff are concerned that the family will stop coming to appointments once the case is closed, as this happened the last time the family had an open case. The children's medical provider and caseworker Cantor are in contact often regarding the well-being of the children. The physician has stated the children have an odor but seem to be in good health. The physician is concerned about teeth as they are not in good condition. Caseworker Cantor is also worried about another child's speech as she is almost 5 years old and cannot speak any clear language. Caseworker Cantor would like the child to have a speech evaluation to address this concern. Caseworker Cantor believes
That phrase should carry the weight of a verdict. It became the refrain that allowed every subsequent horror to occur. Case closed. By October 2020, the judge presiding over the case found that reasonable efforts had been made to keep the children from being removed. The court's order states, "It is therefore ordered that the child remain in the custody of Elizabeth and Gary Ciders Jr. It is further ordered that protective supervision be terminated. It is further ordered that this case be closed." That is the sound of a system congratulating itself for completing paperwork while leaving 9 children in a house where the only measurable progress was the accumulation of evidence.
Late 2020, but then, Dr. Bober, we have a new case opened in December of 2020 where the medical staff contacts Children's Services and says these kids have high levels of lead and that can cause developmental delays. And so then they go back to the house, and there's like gnats and roaches. And this is when the concern about the lead comes up.
And they leave the kids there again.
They leave the kids there again under protective supervision.
Right.
So is this a change in policy that needs to take place? Because obviously the threat of losing their children, it just spurred them to do the bare minimum the first time. And the second time, it looks like the case was then again closed after 6 months, because in June of 2015, they completed the plan and it was closed. And then they skedaddle, they take off, they leave Gallia County. So they're never to be heard from again.
Right. And there's probably no central database in the way that there is if it's a criminal conviction or an arrest warrant, where the case would follow them to a different county. So they were essentially absconding and just leaving it behind them so it wouldn't catch up with them. So yeah, it's actually very scary. I don't know what their policy is. I don't know what their this is our hard line. If we see XYZ, the kids are out of the house. It's just mind boggling.
2 months later, in December 2020, the family moved to a house on Honeysuckle and Cheshire in the same county. Children's Services opened a new case. This time the trigger was not academic neglect, it was lead. 4 of the children had high levels of lead in their blood. Medical staff reported that high lead levels can cause developmental delays. Caseworker Erin Cantor was denied access to the home and asked to come back because the children were sleeping.
Supervision of the children. This time, she saw potential signs of physical abuse that couldn't be explained. Cantor wrote, though the concerns of medical neglect have been addressed and resolved, the refusal to access the upstairs of the home and the children raises new concerns due to there being circular linear bruising on the back of one child's thigh and the lack of being able to see the children. Caseworker Cantor now has concerns of possible abuse and/or severe neglect. Caseworker Cantor also saw insect bites on another child's arms along with scratches. The child also was tugging her ear and scratching her head profusely. The parents were questioned regarding the bruising. They became agitated and stated they were unaware of any bruising. The parents also stated that the child has one cavity on her baby tooth and are not concerned about it. Caseworker Cantor has noticed the parents are always in the same clothing and do not have consistent hygiene nor do the children. Despite all of this, Gallia County Job and Family Services did not seek custody of the children. The agency requested protective supervision, even though Gary Jr. and Elizabeth were described as uncooperative. By June 2021, the court found the caseworker had helped Gary Jr. and Elizabeth complete their case plan, and the court determined it was in the best interest of the children to remain with their parents. The case was closed. Later that year, the children were supposed to attend Attaville Elementary School, but guess what?
When she was finally allowed inside on December 9, she found a high population of roaches, flies, and gnats. The children had an odor. Their teeth were in poor condition. A child almost 5 years old could not speak any clear language. And then Kaner saw something that elevated the file from neglect to something else. She requested access to the upstairs of the home. The parents refused. She noted circular linear bruising on the back of one child's thigh. She noted insect bites and scratches on another child's arms. The child was tugging her ear and scratching her head profusely. When the parents were questioned about the bruising, they became agitated and said they were unaware of any bruising. They also stated the child had one cavity on a baby tooth, and they were not concerned about it. Kaner wrote that she now had concerns of possible abuse and severe neglect.
So to break down what we are now learning, I want to bring in Dr. Daniel Bober. He's a forensic psychiatrist. He has been following this case with me from the very beginning, and he can offer some insight into this case. Dr. Bober, thanks so much for coming back on.
Thanks, Anjanette.
Dr. Bober, first of all, I want to get your reaction. Let's start with the indictment. Gary Jr. and Elizabeth being indicted on sexual battery and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor charges. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, this case has really evolved in a lot of ways, and a lot of new evidence has come to light. So it seems like every day there's a new twist and turn. So it was obviously pretty shocking.
Yeah, very shocking. And, you know, that this is somebody who was a child, some type of family member, not one of their children, but nonetheless a family member. And with the sexual battery charge, you know, that's somebody who more than likely you were either coercing the person to engage in the sex act according to the statute, or you were in a position of authority over that person.
In these cases, you know, you always look at the people that are closest, the so-called intimates of the person. So it's not surprising because these are the people that have the most access to the child. So in that regard, it fits a pretty standard pattern.
Let's move
She
on
requested
now.
court-ordered supervision. The agency requested protective supervision, not custody. Supervision, the children were left in the home again. By June 2021, the court found the caseworker had helped Gary and Elizabeth complete their case plan. The court determined it was in the best interest of the children to remain with their parents. The case was closed. Case closed. Here is where the timeline becomes a thriller rather than a bureaucratic log. Later that year, the children were supposed to attend Attaville Elementary School. They did not show up. The Ciders had disappeared. They left Gallia County without a forwarding address, without a central database flag, and without any mechanism to alert the next county that this family had a documented history of non-compliance.
So you see some balls potentially dropped here by Children's Services in Gallia County.
That's the way it looks. You know, I didn't see what the caseworkers saw. I didn't fill out those reports. I don't have the information that they had. But when you look at this from an outsider's perspective, it seems like there were many opportunities here to intervene and prevent this tragedy from occurring. And it seems like a lot of balls were dropped from the outside.
And now those children are in protective custody. They are in therapeutic foster care. And Dr. Bober, the county is seeking permanent custody of these children, which means the Ciders, and especially with the legal jeopardy they're in, if the county gets permanent custody of these children, the Ciders will never get them back.
And, you know, given everything that's happened, it shows you what a high bar they need to terminate those parental rights. You know, even after everything that's happened, finally, you know, these kids will not go back to that home. And I guess this is what needed to happen. But it seems like something could have been done a lot sooner with earlier intervention. It seems like there would have been a better outcome.
And I hate to make this leap, but it makes you wonder too, if there had been something more done, would the alleged sexual abuse of the other child maybe not have happened.
Yeah, we can only speculate, but it's definitely a question that would come into my mind as well.
Suspected abuse in closed cases. They moved one county north to Benton County, and there, on June 30, 16 children were found hidden in a house on Omar Street. 16, not 9, the family had continued to grow. The conditions had not improved. The case files from Gallia County did not follow them. The concerns did not transfer. The red flags were filed away in 2 closed binders. And then Gary Jr. and Elizabeth were indicted by a grand jury on sexual battery and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor charges.
This case has really evolved in a lot of ways, and a lot of new evidence has come to light. So it seems like every day there's a new twist and turn. So it was obviously pretty shocking.
Yeah, very shocking. And that this is somebody who was a child, some type of family member, not one of their children, but nonetheless a family member. And with the sexual battery charge, that's somebody who more than likely you were either coercing the person to engage in the sex act according to the statute, or you were in a position of authority over that person.
In these cases, you always look at the people that are closest, the so-called intimates of the person. So it's not surprising because these are the people that have the most access to the child. So in that regard, it fits a pretty standard pattern.
Let's move on now to the children's services records that we're seeing. I had been told very early on in this investigation that the reason that this family moved from Gallia County up north one county to Benton County was because Children's Services had been sniffing around, had had some contact with them. And now we're learning exactly what that contact was. In 2020, the school district went to Children's Services and said, these kids are not logging on to school and their grades are awful. And there was really a serious concern that they were falling behind.
It's really disturbing when you consider that there was an element of foreseeability here. The authorities were actually involved and they were actually looking at the case. But it seems that in every case, the children were left in the home. There was some kind of parenting or case plan that was initiated. Supposedly, the parents made some progress on that plan. And then eventually the supervision was called off and the case was closed. And I know in these types of cases, we always try to keep the kids with the family, but it seems like there were definitely some red flags. And I don't know how much of a deep dive these caseworkers did, but it seems like something was really missed. And we know that these agencies very often have huge caseloads with people who are poorly trained, underpaid, undermotivated. And then, of course, there are other ones that do a tremendous job. So I guess we just really don't know exactly what they saw or how much effort was made into really figuring out what was going on.
Those charges are not related to their immediate family members, but to another minor. The child endangerment charges now include a mix of felonies and misdemeanors for the 16 children found in that house. So the question becomes unavoidable. How many times does a system have to document roaches, gnats, bruises, lead poisoning, and parental refusal of access before the word protective means removal? What is the threshold for intervention when the evidence is already in the file? That is the ticking clock. That is the question that reframes this entire story as a procedural thriller, not a local tragedy. The system had the documentation. The system had the legal authority. The system chose to close the case. Twice, case closed. The moral weight of this case is not carried by the parents alone. Gary and Elizabeth will face their indictments. They will be arraigned. The county is seeking permanent custody of the 16 children who are now in therapeutic foster care. But the file from Gallia County contains the signatures of caseworkers, judges, and medical staff who saw the smoke and wrote it down. The forensic psychiatrist who reviewed these records said it plainly. There were so many red flags, so many opportunities to intervene. The reaction was underwhelming and potentially unsafe.
Gary and Elizabeth have not yet been arraigned on the new sex crimes charges they face or the new child endangering charges that will happen at a later date. And remember to check out the case file on Law and Crime Plus. You can check that out anytime and we'll stay on top of this case for you. That's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Anjanette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.
That is not a partisan statement. It is a reading of the public record. The Gallia County Juvenile Court docket is available. The Benton County Grand Jury indictments are public. The affidavits from caseworker Aaron Kaner are not sealed. You can read them yourself. So go to the Gallia County Clerk of Court's website. Search the docket for Ciders. Pull the case numbers ending in 2020. Look for the order that says, "Protective supervision be terminated." Then ask yourself one direct question. At what point does documenting danger without removing the victim become an act of complicity? Put your answer in the comments. If this breakdown of the public record gave you the same controlled fury it gave us, like this video, share it with someone who thinks the system always works, and subscribe to Endless Crime with notifications on. We follow the evidence, even when it leads to a closed case.